John McMullen, of course, talks NFL and Eagles with us every day at 4 o'clock. We call it Football at 4. By the way, we have another chance for you to win $5,000 coming up at the bottom of this hour. So listen for the Sports Bash Cash code word of the day. It is coming up in 28 minutes from now here on the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN. A lot of football, of course. These Eagles OTAs continue. A lot to dive into with the NFL as we are less than 100 days to the opening kick. Think about that, my friends. Less than 100 days to the opening kick of the NFL. And let's dive into some stuff. Now, we were talking about this earlier, John. Get your take if you can even come up with one. Gill Kapadia from The Athletic had a sit-down with one Jeffrey Lurie, who admitted that Chip Kelly giving him full power was one of his biggest regrets in 25 years. The problem is, I can't think that regret is like Bill Belichick to the second biggest one. I can't even think of a second regret that you could definitively say would even challenge that one.
Yeah, it's not exactly mind-bending that he understands that was a mistake in hindsight. But I often point out, look, it's obvious to say it was a mistake. It's so clear. But there was a silver lining to it. I think people forget that Howie Roseman pre-losing control wasn't the same as Howie Roseman post. And part of the reason why is because he took that time and he took that year to reflect on the things he did wrong. I've talked about it a lot in the past. He was given permission to travel and pick the mind of other successful sports executives. Even in other sports like Brian Cashman, R.C. Buford, people like that. And I think it was very helpful. And I think the Howie Roseman that returned was different than the Howie Roseman who lost the power struggle to Chip Kelly. So as bad as it was, and in a vacuum it was really, really bad, there was a silver lining to it. So I think that's what you have to hang your hat on. Proven best by the fact that we did our own GM rankings last week. I had Howie Roseman at 3. Other people had him at 2. He wasn't at 3 or 2 before.
He was out the door for many.
Yeah. So there is a significant shift in the way Howie does his job. So as bad as it was in the moment, good things came from it.
John, the only one that I could really think of to even put on the list, we thought about this. He has been the owner for 25 years. They have had 7 losing seasons in 25 years. 7 losing seasons. That's it. That's. I think that gets overlooked a lot.
Yeah, I mean, he's been a great owner. And we also discussed that and the fact that you have a generation of fans that don't understand it hasn't always been like this. And there hasn't been the consistency of winning from the football team. And the expectations have risen to such a significant degree. And a lot of that stems from Jeffrey Lurie. When we were talking about Andy Reid last week and Donovan McNabb, I also put Jeffrey into that category. Those are really the 3 guys most responsible from turning the Eagles from, let's be honest, a pretty bad organization to one that's regarded as one of the best in this league. I think if you're looking at one of the great mistakes was uttering the phrase gold standard, but they're pretty good. They're not the gold standard, but they're certainly top 5 organization in this league. And I think there is a whole generation of fans that doesn't understand it could be a lot different, and it has been a lot different in the past.
Yeah. Do you even have a second? You said that one. The other one that I came up with was, and this isn't even anything to do with their decision, was to change the uniforms.
Yeah, I mean, hey, that's fan stuff. I mean,
but that's what I'm saying. If it's to the point where changing the uniform color is one of the biggest gripes you have with an ownership, You're ahead of it. You're winning, man.
That's pretty good.
Right?
It doesn't have to – look, we're talking about Joe Douglas interviewing with the Jets this weekend, and you see the story that came out of New York today about that organization.
Right.
You live in the NFC East, and you've seen the dysfunction in Washington for so many years. You've seen the dysfunction at times in Dallas, although they seem to have at least tempered things a little bit in recent seasons. And even in New York has always, with the Giants, not the Jets, has always been a very stable organization. But they've struggled so badly with how to handle the waning years of Eli Manning's career. That has fostered dysfunction. There's a lot of organizations in this league that struggle from a year-to-year basis. Cleveland probably the most notable, finally, after so many years. 1999 was essentially the reboot of that franchise. They were a disaster for 2 decades, and it's finally turning a bit. But, yeah, it could be bad.
John McMullen, Football at 4, talking a little NFL. And, he mentioned, how much longer do you think Jeffrey Lurie? I mean, is he in this for the long haul? I mean, he's been here 25 years, which is, that's a long run. I mean, do we just take for granted that? I think a lot of fan bases just take for granted that the ownership is going to be there and that it's going to be stable, because a lot of places don't have that, right? I mean, is Jeffrey still in this for another 20 years?
Well, he's certainly healthy. He looks younger than he is. He enjoys it. He's out at practice every day, watching practice. He loves to watch practice. He doesn't really have any other businesses. I mean, this is it now. So I do think he is in it for the long haul. I don't think he wants to do anything else. So it is a good situation to have. And to have stable ownership isn't a constant in any professional sport. I think Eagles fans have been spoiled. I've said it a lot. And whether it's not understanding the greatness of Andy Reid or not respecting Donovan McNabb despite his personal demons and inability to accept the fact that not everybody loves him, or not understanding how good they had it with Jeffrey Lurie until the Super Bowl, that all plays into it. I mean, I talk about it all the time with you, Mike. When you place in the NFL, when you place people and rate players and rate coaches and rate owners, you have to do it against their peers. And if you look at things that way, instead of complaining, well, we didn't win another Super Bowl, or Donovan isn't this, or Andy Reid wasn't that, how many of their peers were better? And that's where I think people kind of get lost in the forest, so to speak.
Yeah, well, and it's funny because you mentioned about Howie, and he got thrown down the hallway, and we know that whole story. And it seems that Jeffrey is also in the same boat, where he is not this overly popular owner, but maybe should be more popular than he gets credit for. You know what I mean? Like, there's certain ownership groups that who they are, and they're very when you think of the Steelers, you think of the Rooneys. I mean, there's a lot of ownerships that are
and you think of Bob Kraft, and bigger than life characters. Jerry Jones would be number one.
Yeah,
probably. I mean, he's kind of understated. He's not as boisterous as certain people, and that could be good and that could be bad. I mean, look, we all know the good and bad.
How much input do you think he's not one of them guys that makes football decisions or gets medals in there and says you need to do this, or like Ed Snyder, you got to sign Brizgalov, we got to get a goaltender. Like, he's not that guy.
No, he's not that hands-on, but I can tell you he does sort of, and Howie's a good example. I mean, when Howie got that job, I think a lot of people forget it was kind of open-ended. There was never an official announcement. In fact, we made a lot of it at the time that's kind of lost in history because it's been so successful. There was no declaration that this is Howie Roseman's job again. And that's because Jeffrey allowed him back into the personnel side, but with a very short leash. And the old Howie Roseman wasn't going to work. And he told him that. And the word you always hear from the Eagles is collaboration. And he wanted Howie to listen to more people. He wanted to have a more inviting front office where everybody can offer their opinions and everybody be listened to. And that's where you have the success with Joe Douglas. So it is a different setup. It's a different Howie Roseman, and the old Howie Roseman wouldn't have lasted, who had and won many power struggles of his own. People also forget that before he finally lost one to Chip Kelly. And I think anytime you're having constant power struggles, that's a clear signal that it's not a good organization. There was a span of years after Joe Banner, up until Howie's second reign, where there were constant power struggles at the top of this organization. And Jeffrey cleaned that up, and he deserves credit for it.
Yeah, I mean, it was real. I remember when they basically, parted ways with Andy, and, once they got fired, but they just decided he's not going to come back. And, I mean, he was at that press conference, and Jeffrey Lurie said, we want to be 5 years ahead of 5 years. We want that next guy that when he's got new ideas, everyone's changing to his ideas, and then that guy's changing to something new. It seemed like he had this romance that he was going to be ahead of the curve, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, they still have that. There is I'll be honest, there's a bit of haughtiness to the Eagles organization. Some of it deserved, some of it undeserved. The analytics part of it that Gill also got into with Jeffrey, that's part of it. They think they're sort of ahead of the curve. I don't know if that's necessarily as true as they think it is. But nonetheless, I think for the most part, they're ahead of most teams, and that's all you can do. And I bring that up again. You can only rate people against their peers. And the Eagles are probably more forward-thinking than the vast majority of the organizations in this league. Where I will pump the brakes is I don't think they're quite as ahead of the pack as they think they are. And maybe that'll come back to bite him at some point. But you'll have to wait and see.
Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN. Yeah, that was one of the topics that Sheil Kapadia had a sit-down with Eagles owner Jeffrey Lurie, who came out and said, one of his biggest regrets in 25 years of ownership is that he gave all this power to Chip Kelly. And now he's got it, in a spot where the Eagles, he mentioned gold standard. I couldn't believe that they've only had 7 losing seasons, in 25 years. I was stunned that it was only 7. It shows you that we're so – they only have the one Super Bowl, but, man, are we a little spoiled here where you got a team like Detroit, Cleveland, Cincinnati. Cincinnati's been okay in the last 10 years, but there's been a lot of franchises who just can't get it right, man.
Oh, yeah. We talked about that when we were rating coaches, when we rated the coaches. I had Andy Reid at number 2, and the consistency and how he has developed his coaching tree and developed so many great coaches are the 2 check marks in his column. I use the Buffalo Bills, the Mark Levy Buffalo Bills are probably a better example of this than the Andy Reid Eagles, but it's similar. They don't get the credit they deserve because they never won a Super Bowl. But when you talk about making 4 and the consistency of being able to do that from year to year to year to year, man, that's more impressive. I get it. No one's happy because you don't get over the top. But if you talk to people in this industry who do it every day, that is harder to do. Go to 4 straight than win 1. Yeah. And they know that. But it's tough to make people understand that. And when you talk about the Eagles and Andy Reid and that group in the 5 NFC championship games over that decade span, that is really, really difficult to do. And if you say win 1 Super Bowl, I don't think there's any question. Every fan would trade 1 Super Bowl, and I don't disagree with it. But it is much harder to do what they did than, say, win 1 and spike and then be 7-9, 8-8, 9-7, it's just more difficult to do. And people in the industry understand that, but you're never going to make people outside of it understand.
Which is interesting because on, I guess, Monday when all this McNabb, last week McNabb, Hall of Fame and all that stuff came up, and we were talking about, Mosher and I were going back and forth. And, the one guy, he said his numbers were better than was Aikman, but his numbers are eerily similar to Jim Kelly. And we say, well, Kelly never won a Super Bowl, so he doesn't have that to go to. But the accomplishment of getting to 4 was, now he does have his USFL numbers.
USFL, yeah. I mean, people are caught up in numbers. I said it last week. It's just not a numbers-based game, the NFL. And certainly as you go from era to era to era, there are mediocre quarterbacks now who put up bigger numbers than some of the great quarterbacks in the 70s and even 80s because the game has changed so drastically. So, Jim's in no doubt about it, Hall of Famer, even though he didn't win one. Part of it is the fact that he went to so many and the consistency of being at the helm of a team that won so much, put him over the top. I don't think Donovan reaches his range, to be fair.
Yeah, his NFL numbers, I'm saying, by the way. It's not his total. It's just his NFL numbers.
But I do think Donovan had tremendous consistency as a quarterback in this league, and I do think he falls just short. But as I said, I think he's a borderline Hall of Fame player. I think he's just on the wrong side of the border, and he's ultimately not going to make it.
What was it about Jeffrey's analytical talk that might have fans a little ticked off?
The run game. I tweeted because I wanted people to read Gill's piece because it was tremendous, so I didn't give many spoilers. But, I mean, I can't tell you how many arguments I've had with you and Jeff and fans in general. They don't care about the run game, and they're not wrong. And so when we revisit the draft every year and we talk about could the Eagles possibly take Josh Jacobs, and I told you, no, they're not. They're not considering it. And they're not considering – now, that's not to say – they wouldn't take a running back in the first round. I always go back to Christian McCaffrey. If it's the right type of player, they would consider taking a player. But you have to be dominant in the passing game as well. That has to be a part of it. That's just what the modern NFL is.
Right.
It is a different game. In the run game, pounding it, it's just not important to the Eagles. It's never going to be important to the Eagles, and I hate to break that to people.
You mentioned what's going on with the Jets, this story about that they pursued coaches before they fired Todd Bowles and how poorly everything was handled up there. You kind of hinted at it when we were talking about how stable Jeffrey Lurie has made the Eagles. Christopher Johnson and that family, how unstable they have made the Jets, including that bizarre story about trying to poach coaches while they still had – I mean, what a crazy story that all turned out to be.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, a lot of fans are looking to Joe Douglas and hoping he reads that story from management and thinks about.
Hey, read this and see if you still want to go there.
Yeah, and look, I there's no question there's been tremendous dysfunction. There's back and forth on how much work they did. While Todd Bowles was still there and trying to gauge the interest of Cliff Kingsbury. I think Joe knows it's been a bad organization. The point is you're trying to go there to turn it into a good organization. That's the point. You wouldn't be in a position to have this type of job if things were going well. And that's any hiring cycle. They weren't necessarily going well when he came here. He was part of it. He was part of what turned things around. So I do think it is up to the individual. George Patton, I talked about him a lot last week. He turned down the Jets again, and he's been that guy. He's turned down sort of the new Eric DeCosta. He's turned down literally over 10, 12 interviews over the past 5 years or so. Mm-hmm. Some people are comfortable with where they are and want to wait things out until they get a really, really stable atmosphere. But you might be waiting a while if you take that tact. And Eric DeCosta is a perfect example. He had to wait a really, really long time in Baltimore before Ozzie Newsome finally stepped down. Is Joe willing to wait that long to find a stable position? I don't know. I don't think so. In fact, I talk about it all the time. He said to me directly he wants to be a GM. Well, if you want to be a GM, you got to go be a GM. And it's not necessarily going to be the perfect situation.
Yeah, and then we've got George Patton, by the way, who the Vikings, he turned down the opportunity, so maybe he read the New York papers.
Yeah, well, it's the third time he's turned down the Jets. When they hired John Idzik, they wanted to interview him. He turned them down. When they hired Mike McCagnon, they wanted to interview him. He turned them down. They wanted to interview him again. He turned them down. And the Jets aren't the only one. Like I said, he's had about anywhere from 10 to 15 requests. He's turned them all down.
John McMullen, everybody. We call it Football at 4. We do it every day at 4 o'clock. We just talk NFL, a lot of NFL football topics. Eagles OTAs. What are they, like a number 5, 6? They got about 4 or 5 left?
They got 4 left next week. Today was the last of this week, and then it's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and that's it for the OTAs. Then you have minicamp, and then we're off to training camp.
Unbelievable. Less than 100 days till kickoff, and you know it right here, 97.3 ESPN, your home for Eagles football. August. I can't believe we're in June, but August. You will hear each and every Eagles preseason game, and that starts August the 8th against the Tennessee Titans right here on 97.3 ESPN. All right, John, take care, pal.
All right, take care, Mike.
All right, Football at 4. We do it every day.